Greetings, I'm Keith Klein, the host of the VentureFizz podcast, where I interview the most fascinating people in the tech scene. This is episode 332, and today's guest is Ben Lerer, managing partner at Lerer Hippeau. The tech scene in New York City has come a very, very long way over the past 14 or 15 years. A lot of that transformation and growth was due to access to early stage capital, which wasn't very prevalent back then. But Lerer Hippeau was a key element to the foundation of its success as a seed stage investor. The firm was an early investor in many consumer brands that you probably recognize, as they have all been very successful, like Allbirds, Casper, Warby Parker, BuzzFeed, Mirror, Venmo, and many more. Its reputation was built on these consumer breakouts, but ultimately, the firm is category agnostic, investing equally across the enterprise and consumer landscapes. For example, take a look at two of their most recent investments, that being two Boston companies, 10 Beauty, which is consumer robotics for manicures, and Tollbit, content monetization in the era of AI. We talk about both companies in detail in this podcast. Ben is now a full-time VC after founding and running Thrillist that scaled and then added other digital media brands under its umbrella as Group 9 Media, which was later acquired by Vox Media. In this episode of our podcast, we cover lots of great topics, like Ben's thoughts on the market and if now is the ideal time to start a company, the inspiration behind Thrillist, plus lots of great stories and lessons learned around the full life cycle and evolution of the company to Group 9 Media and its acquisition by Vox, advice for entrepreneurs on building a startup media company in today's world, how Lerer Hippeau came to fruition and what they are targeting for investments, plus why Ben considers himself a talent-driven investor versus a thesis-driven investor, and so much more. Okay, quick side note. This is exciting. This is for the "Hey Mom, I made it" category. We are in a book, not any old book, but a book from MIT. So be on the lookout for the new entrepreneurial book called Startup Tactics. It was released on April 2nd, and it features 15 tactics entrepreneurs need for success. You'll find VentureFizz listed as a tool of the trade in the chapter on hiring for startups, which is absolutely amazing. Go get your copy now from Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and bookshop.org. All right, without further ado, here is my interview with Ben. Ben, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
I'm excited to talk to you. We've got so much to cover here. It's a podcast that probably could take hours and hours and hours, but we're going to do our job of keeping it within an hour or so. But to talk, kind of kick things off, the market's a little finicky right now in the tech industry, and it's been that way for a stretch. I'm optimistic. I'm always an optimist that we're starting to see the pendulum shift in the right direction again. But when I think back to history of tech and these downturns, there's always a cycle where things are gloom and doom. Yet, if you look at the market leading companies that were born in that 2008, 2009 era, I'm thinking about, the Ubers, the Airbnbs, the Stripes, those are the pillar companies. So is now a good time for entrepreneurs to build a company?
Yeah, so great question. And look, I too am like broadly an optimist, and I think you have to be if you're going to be an early stage investor. But look, on the one hand, I would say I think it's always a good time to start a company if you are doing it for the right reasons and you're the right person. Like there is, opportunity abounds, and we're big believers, and really I'd say sort of like talent hunters here. And so I wouldn't say that sort of one cycle is better than another on any individual given company basis. That being said, there are some reasons that this is a pretty interesting time to start a company. And I think I won't start with the obvious, which is AI
Right.
and the opportunity that AI affords to disrupt every nook and cranny of the universe. Let's take that as a given, an important given, but one that everybody who talks about this stuff will talk about relentlessly. I think maybe what I'll focus on is uh, the way that somebody or a company grows up. I think is significant in the way that it behaves as it gets older. It's the same as like a child, like how you're raised matters. And growing up at a time when money is harder to come by, and when the bar is generally higher and there is more discipline, probably is going to birth a generation of companies that are gritty, that are margin and model focused, that are doing it for, in some way, shape, or form, sort of the right reasons, because this is not like a glamour time to go raise a company. Of course, there are pockets of the economy, and AI again is one of those where maybe money is easier and some in some cases sort of irrationally easier to come by. But generally speaking, if you're building a company right now, you you're gonna have to really like get the crap kicked out of you a little bit to go do it. And so I think it's going to build foundationally better habits, and probably a bunch of really interesting companies that are going to uh that are just going to be more durable on the margin.
I completely agree, and it's a time in history that I'm not a fan of it. I don't like how it feels, but it's something that you knew had to happen because things were just way too frivolous and it needed to get back to basics. And what is happening now is you need to build a product where there's a market that people spend money to purchase with real fundamentals that you're not spending way ahead of the curve. And it's easy to raise capital to continue to keep that curve going.
Yeah, I think everybody now says, myself included, oh, everything, money was free and everything was frivolous and everything was easy. And it's really easy to sort of Monday morning quarterback that and look back and go, oh, it was also. But the reality is, to varying degrees of insanity, everyone participated in it, and everybody made these mistakes. And I look back now, and I didn't appreciate how no zero interest rate environment, and how COVID, the sort of like the bounce back and the money flooding, money coming in from the government, and all the various behavior changes, like, we knew it was sort of boom times, but I don't think we realized what boom, that it wasn't boom times, that it was psychotic times. And this is this this correction, I mean, in some areas I would argue that, like, we have overcorrected and the pendulum has swung too far. In other areas, I would say that lessons have not been learned as I would have expected them to. And we still see irrational, bizarre things happening around the market that I don't think can be, that are, I think we'll look back a few years from now, and there'll be a lot of the things getting done right now, and we'll go, really? Like, again? Like, 23 was also a totally insane, crazy, irresponsible vintage right after 21. Like, and I think that, like, there'll also, I'm sure, be some generationally important companies that are, built in this cycle. But it is, uh, but then I would say the pendulum has swung too far in what I would consider to be sort of non-consensus areas, or places where the core of the why now is not AI, and there are real companies solving real problems that are getting overlooked by mid and late stage capital, because they're not, there are more consensus, more of the moment. And uh, that's a drag for those founders. I do think, like, all's well that ends well, and if they keep slogging and keeping their head down and building the right way, like, they'll get rewarded for it. But there's a bunch of great companies that are sort of swept up in not being the flavor of the month, that are in the midst of having a tough go of it, and I think are going to continue to have a tough go of it for a while. And that's a bummer.
Yeah, it's gonna be interesting to see how it all plays out. Well, let's rewind the clock. So, where did you grow up? What were you like as a child?
Oh boy. Well, I grew up in New York. A very, very attractive, handsome boy. No, I grew up in Manhattan, like a proper city kid, and um, moved to Philly for college, and lived there for 4 years, and then came straight back after school. Uh, and essentially straight out of school, a year or two out of school, started a tech company here in New York in the digital media space at a time when the tech ecosystem was very underdeveloped and early and uh, really collaborative and really fun and felt like this sort of like, you know, underdog community. And I've told this story many times before, and so I don't want to belabor it if anyone's ever heard me talk about anything. But like the short version is, found myself in the middle of the tech scene because I was a founder myself and started investing in my peers, and the fund grew out of the deal flow that I had as a product of being a founder in a town without a lot of founders. And New York blossomed at the same moment that I was building my company. And so I got to, you know, write a first check into Warby and Venmo and BuzzFeed and a bunch of sort of early cool New York stuff that got in one way, shape, or form, big and or a lot of attention and or birthed a bunch of talent. And to make a very long story pretty short, we grew in New York. New York grew, and we continued to grow and build our team. We're now a 20-something person team, all based in New York, and we've been, stubbornly, and I would say, proudly, very consistent in terms of knowing what we are and we aren't, and we know what we are and what we aren't, and we are a 0 to 1 investor. We are, going to lead or lead or co-lead pre-seed and seed rounds. Our playbook and our sort of, platform is built around helping companies get to the first sort of semblance of product market fit to go out and, I don't think it's to like get on the VC hamster wheel per se, but to go and set themselves up to be able to go and raise that sort of next round of financing to hopefully, build something enduring and big. And we're generalists. We're really most interested in the team. I would say second most interested in the sort of market and the team's right to win in that market and their sort of view and vision for how that market will evolve. And then least interested in traction. Not to say that like traction is not a good thing, but if you back a company because of traction, in the early days, it is inevitable that that traction at some point is going to sort of get a little fuzzy or hit a wall or something's not going to work. Like that first sales motion or that first, customer motion is probably going to like run out of steam relatively quickly. And when it does, you're left with the founders and you're left with that team. And so, I think like a lot of investors, we bias really heavily towards right team, right market as our primary focus. The last thing I'll just add is the company I started a long time ago, I continued to build for 14 years as and ran day to day and learned a lot of good things, a lot of bad decisions, raised a bunch of money as an operator and built a company that, was, built something real, a few $100 million of rev and a few, 700, 800 full-time employees, like built a real company, but like learned an extraordinary amount during that process. And, think that gives me some edge in terms of how I assess founders and how I help founders and how I empathize with founders. And that's the story.
Yeah, I mean, to have that operating background, I think is such an edge for what you do as an investor. But I did want to unpack the company you built, Thrillist and Group 9 Media. So what prompted you to start the company? What was that initial aha moment?
Yeah, I mean, I think what prompted me to start it was, there's a bunch of different ways that people come to sort of starting a business. The actual underlying business model was not one of my strengths in the early days. I think, I understood the consumer need. I was a young guy living in New York, running around town trying to figure out how to live a productive social life, and felt like the publications that I was consuming were not built for me. I mean, this is like way pre like personalization. This is just like, Daily Candy existed for women as sort of like a woman's city guide. And there was like a lot of generalized like restaurant guides, but there was nothing for, my demographic of young idiot. And that's what we built Thrillist for, and it was like a hobby that turned into something that got traction, and then ultimately became my job and career. And as I scaled that business and got to sort of understand the various like levers around monetization and audience growth and brand building, and the sort of disparate business models that need to exist within a media company to have it thrive. I mean, it's a very operationally complex business to build like a standalone digital media brand, and so came to believe that there was an opportunity to build a larger platform by launching and or buying and sort of consolidating the space and creating a holding company. I think I looked at like what a Hearst or a Condé Nast had done in print journalism, and obviously making their way into digital, but felt like there was an opportunity to build something not dissimilar in the digital media space, and looked up to the Voxes of the world and felt like I could you know try my hand at it. And so that's what we did, and again, did some things really well, and also just learned a ton about uh the space that we were in, and uh making hard decisions.
Well, how did you get that initial growth? Like, it sounded like you started out sending this email to 600 people, and then obviously things happened from there. But to do city by city for Thrillist specifically is not an easy thing to do as a media company because every location has its own, restaurants and hotspots. It's tough to duplicate success that's so big in New York, but doing that in Chicago
Yeah,
or
great question. And look, I do think that we developed a sort of rinse and repeat go to market motion, not unlike a SaaS company going out and figuring out, how it tackles mid market or how it tackles a geography. I mean, we had the same strategy, which is we knew a certain kind of profile of market leading editor that we would hire, and they would build a network of stringers, and we sort of had like a formula for what that looked like and how to build the right kind of coverage. And we developed some national strategies for how we would partner to go out and find users and do sort of content swaps, and then we developed local strategies per market, executed from a central core where we would go and build local partnerships with sort of, this is pre-influencers, but influential voices and local magazines or local organizations in those markets to go and create awareness. And it's like any other, it's a marketing playbook, and we developed a market by market playbook that we got good at, and it helped us go from growing. I can't remember the exact numbers, but maybe in year one we grew to 30,000 subs, and in year two, 150,000, and in year three, 500,000, like an accelerating uh, go to market motion as we launched new markets, and we would then grow within a market, achieve profitability in like a core mature market and know what that looks like. And then you'd go, and I mean, it's, you know, look, so many companies at the end of the day, they're very similar. You make a product, maybe you call it sales, maybe you call it marketing, you take that product to market, and so that's why a lot of these P&Ls look, it doesn't matter if you're a consumer person or an editor, like the businesses look relatively similar on paper when you sort of like really unpack them. And I think that we learned a lot. And by the way, we ran out of steam in our eventually, like market 20 wasn't that interesting anymore, and getting to scale in New York could represent X number of millions of dollars of revenue, and Charlotte could represent Y, and the
Mhm.
cost to run Charlotte was not all that much less than running New York.
Right.
And the model got more challenging, and we said, okay, how else do we monetize this audience? And brought us into commerce, and it brought us into events, and it brought us into all licensing, and all the different models that we've seen sort of digital media and traditional media companies have to go and enter. By the way, like, this happens at the absolute top of the market with Netflix now selling advertising. Eventually the sub business starts slowing down, and you got to figure out your next trick, and maybe it's international, and maybe it's advertising. And then one day, I can tell you, there's going to be Netflix World that's going to look like Disney World. I mean, like, you know, like we know what this looks like, guys. And so, we were running our own playbook that way.
Now, you acquired Jack Threads, which I remember, hearing about that, reading about it in TechCrunch, and the combination of content and commerce was a world that certainly makes a lot of sense. But it seemed like
Yeah, look.
what so if I'm from the outside looking in, being like, okay, I see the marriage, where did that not
Yeah, you know what's
tightly
funny?
integrate?
It's like we were right and we were wrong. And I think in most of life you're probably right and wrong in most decisions you make. But this one was, you know, we were I don't know, $15 million advertising business at Thrillist. Growing, company was profitable, but it was like a little business. And we were doing our thing. And I said, where are we going to find, by the way, I'm an operator building this company. I'm also at this point, like I've been investing for 5 or 6 years, and I'm seeing tech leverage in other kinds of
Mhm.
companies that are less people heavy, that aren't in digital media. And I'm seeing different kinds of growth. And I'm going, am I an idiot? Am I building in the right space? Like,
Right.
this seems easier over there. And I'm getting the bug for like, we've all seen, what's cooler than a $15 million company? Like,
Mhm.
right?
Right.
Like, you get the bug and you're like, how does this thing get big? I want to build a big thing. I'm around these other founders who are building these prominent things. And I'm, you know, writing checks as a VC, and you start to, you want more. And we had this idea was, we have a large captive trusted audience at Thrillist. How do we monetize them differently? Right now I'm making, pennies on the dollar with advertising. How do I own more of that relationship? And, do you charge them for the content? Do you throw events? Do like there's so many ways that your mind can take you. And one of the ways was, why don't we start to get into the transaction flow? What do these people buy? And there was a small but very successful Thrillist advertiser. Successful meaning like their ROI on ad spend with Thrillist was really strong. And it was this company called Jack Threads, which was this, $1 million Columbus, Ohio founded little e-commerce site that had strong overlap with our young guy audience. And I got to know the founder, and we liked each other and had some camaraderie, and said, hey, let's join forces. We're going to buy Jack Threads. We're going to roll you in. You're going to run it. And we're going to try to take advantage of marketing to this audience and build a bigger business. And the reality is we did that. But what became clear was Jack Threads really quickly got bigger than Thrillist. And the amount of users that Thrillist could send was really a fraction of what Facebook could send,
Hmm.
or what Google could send. And we started to sort of, I wouldn't say, I mean, deprecate the reliance on Thrillist and the sort of the symbiotic relationship. And we started to say, oh boy, this Jack Threads thing is ripping. We got to build out all the infrastructure for it. Now let's go, we have to build out the customer service call center, and we have to start doing our own fulfillment, because the business is getting big enough that we have to start thinking about margin, and getting access to inventory at the prices and the scale that we're getting it at is getting harder and harder. Maybe we need to start making our own stuff. And so Jack Threads went from being this, and by the way, it followed the same trajectory as a company like Gilt, which like it worked so well until it didn't, in terms of, Gilt worked beautifully when you could consign mistakes from brands that people were familiar with. And when Gilt got into having to buy inventory upfront and have brands cut for them, you start holding inventory, and it becomes an asset heavy, not asset light model. And the whole trajectory of the business changes. And the same thing happened with us at Jack Threads. And the business got very quickly, we bought it at 1 million, and probably, 3 years later, it's probably close to $100 million revenue business. And I looked around the company, and I had built two companies, not one. And I had a
Right.
CEO of Jack Threads, and I had, someone running Thrillist, and I had built like this weird, like, on the one hand, the business was like growing and doing well, and we had raised money into this combined thing. On the other hand, the the actual relationship between the two things was not what we had dreamt it to be or written it up to be on paper. And then I had this sort of aha moment where I went to go raise money. I went to, the later stage version of me and said, here's my story. And I believed that 1 + 1 was going to equal 3. Someone was going to say, oh boy, this media business and this commerce business and these things work together. And this is a great story. And I'm going to think about this on a different multiple and a different trajectory. And this is better than 1 or 2. This is better than either of those things. This is some really sexy combo. And what I actually found in market was there were investors who liked my media business and said, I get it. I see the dynamics. I see the size. I see what this is. This commerce thing feels scary. You're holding inventory, you're doing this stuff. I'm like a media guy. What are you doing? Vice versa. You go talk to retail companies and they go, this is really cool. What's this media thing over here? And 1 + 1 equaled 1.5. And I felt like the decision, if we wanted to go and give either company its best shot at being really successful, was going to be to split the two businesses up. And in a funny way, it was easier to do than one might have imagined because we had built a bunch of infrastructure around both of them. There wasn't as much duplication of team, and so or there was a lot of duplication of team, I should say. There wasn't, like, the shared resources were sort of splintered because we had to build specific corporate capabilities to manage each of the two very different businesses. And so we spun Jack Threads out to investors, and I stayed with Thrillist and continued to build that business, which I then still believed in consolidation, but believed in consolidation with brands that looked a lot more similar to one another, where we could leverage one corporate versus having to build duplicative ones.
Right. And so the brands are like the Dodo, Now This, Seeker, Pop Sugar. So
Pop
all,
Sugar, yeah. We
yeah.
started buying brands and building some brands, and it worked. It did work. It was really hard, and I learned a bunch of hard lessons around how to integrate teams and how to build sort of an organization that allowed for very different kinds of cultures to coexist, but also have some corporate identity, and to manage people who were, you know, different fiefdoms and different, personalities. And I think at first when we combined the businesses, I really naively was like, to make a holding company, you place someone in corporate who's responsible for a thing, and then you have them manage that thing for the business divisions. And while that is true, the actual nuances of how to get a holding company operating efficiently is an entirely different process than the sort of naive Lego that I was playing. And so for a year and a half, I went through this really sort of bumpy process of figuring out how to bring these where to bring them together and where to leave them apart. And right as we got our mojo, COVID happened. And we got our mojo immediately sucked away from us. And then subsequently, 3 months later, poured back on with jet fuel, as the economy came roaring back, and the ad market exploded, and people had to but people were still sitting in their houses consuming content online like never before. And so we went on this like really great, exciting run, and the company grew a lot and got profitable, and then we sold the business. Um,
So
and
the acquisition
Yeah,
was Fox Media.
to Vox Media, which I'm a board member of, and you know, like I remain sort of in awe of the collection of brands and the operational, uh, both sort of like complexity but also elegance that business is run with. And we had our board meeting yesterday, and my role is to be, in Jim's corner for whatever he needs me for as a board member. But operationally, I'm 100% focused on building Lerer Hippeau for the last 2 years. Really, for the first time ever, I've been a full-time VC.
Well, I do want to dig deep into the world of you as an investor, but the quick little side note, what advice would you have for a startup media company today based on the current landscape and everything that you
Oh
learned that you just
God.
went through so quickly, but we could do like hours of conversations of many line items, but
The advice that I would give to a startup media company today would be don't raise venture capital. Don't try to raise venture capital. Uh, there is room to build self-sustaining, important, you know, high integrity, journalistic, like real brands that can grow to, maybe tens of millions of dollars on a standalone basis in revenue and do so at margins that can produce profit. And where these brands go wrong is trying to build billion-dollar standalone digital media entities. And venture capital wants a certain kind of outcome as a sort of rule. And I think that kind of capital will drive companies to make the wrong kinds of decisions. And I'm all for people wanting to go start new media businesses. I love media, but I don't think that it's a venture backable category today. And I would add to that, I would have said that before AI sort of, took the world by storm. And now I look at the role that what AI enables, and uh, without some, I think without some real focus, there's going to be media is going to get harder, not easier, with the number of agents that are going to go and effectively steal the work of journalists worldwide.
which leads to a recent Lerer Hippeau investment, Tollbit.
Indeed. Yep. It does. You are, Keith, you never cease to surprise in your knowledge of the portfolio. Yeah, we just invested in a company called Tollbit just a few weeks ago, which is building essentially a toll booth that will exist between, and I would say the wedge, sort of like the tip of the spear, is publisher sites. But I think the idea is any destination website seeks to be disrupted by what will be a new army of agents. And maybe the tip of the spear is search, but will be all different kinds of AI applications that essentially are trying to make it so that end users don't need to go visit the websites as sort of the internet has been wired to, to be built on for the last 20 years. And what does that mean for the business model of everyone who's built a destination website? And it's one thing if OpenAI was the only group and if every company can go and do a one-off BD relationship with OpenAI, but the reality is there's going to be thousands of end applications that are going to want to go and scrape and repackage and train on and use in some way, shape, or form the content or the tools that exist on destination websites. And hand-to-hand combat BD deals with everybody is not going to work, and you need to meet the agents with agents. And that is what Tollbit is trying to build, which is this layer that can exist to provide both a path to monetization and also a means for these agents to legally and fairly access content. And this isn't like just to protect the website that is being disintermediated. I also believe this is to protect the AI bot that's going to go and use that content. And we're going to need to figure out what a new economy is for bots and how they're going to have to pay for accessing people's content. And I don't know what the bid ask looks like, and I don't know what the, what all those nuances look like, but I know that there's a big company to be built in between these two spaces. And I think that the Tollbit team has a really smart and sort of interesting perspective. And I think they're very strong technically, and they're getting really interesting reception from, both sides of the marketplace right now.
Yeah, that was one when I saw the announcement. I was like, once I read what they did, I'm like, oh, that's a no-brainer. I'm like, that needs to exist. Absolutely. That's just was like a no-brainer. Um, so not to spend time just on portfolio companies, but I did want to highlight a recent podcast guest on VentureFizz, which was Alex Shishu, 10 Beauty, which I mean, come on, like that
How did
one,
I not
like,
hear that? How did I not hear Shashu? My
oh,
God.
like, uh, you know, it's just what I was super excited about is the future of robotics is here when you see what they're doing. It's got less to do about the actual practical application of what that machine does with the manicure. It's more of like, okay, this is the Jetsons moment where this actually is pushing robotics away from the Roomba, which I love my Roomba in my home. It's amazing. It's great, but we need to level that up. And that, I mean, this is exponential leveling up.
Yep. Well, one of the things I love about this company, there's a few things I love about 10 Beauty. And as always, for me, it starts with the team, with Justin and Alex, who I've known for a long time, through, meandering ways. They're actually Penn guys, about a decade behind me, unfortunately for me. And uh, Justin and Alex had been successful in a past life. They had started another business. They had sold a business. They very and sort of clearly and unapologetically weren't interested in building a incremental business. They wanted to take a really big swing and build something that does sort of change the way that like we think about what's possible. And I was, like you sort of mentioned, my excitement wasn't, oh my God, manicures, like that's the ticket. But my excitement was, this is a big market. Like if you get manicures right, there's 100 other markets that you can go get right. Beauty is a really interesting broad stroke space. And what they have done, you can do things the right way and you can do things the wrong way. They've taken the right path. They've taken the hard path, which is, we don't want to solve part of the problem. We're not building a better nail painter. We're building a thing that fully transforms an entire experience. We're going to remove your nail polish. We're going to shape your nail. We're going to cut your cuticle. We're going to paint your nail, and we're going to dry your nails. We're going to replace the entire human experience. And to do that, the requirements in terms of vision technology, in terms of figuring out the right solutions to create, like to solve this problem. Here's what I can tell you with absolute certainty. I have literally no idea how to solve this problem.
Right.
And
Yeah.
thank God I'm not supposed to be the one to do it. What the best part of my job is finding people who are crazy enough that they want to devote their life. And in this case, these guys have spent the last 4 years head down in the lab building an amazing team of technologists from a bunch of different disciplines with no, like, not being able to see the light of day, not going out and being able, like, to do that much pre-work, to have to raise that kind of money, like, really bold, really big swing. But if you get it right, it's a really big company. It's really fascinating IP. And they've done it. They've actually done it. And it's meant that they needed to hire incredible talent. It's meant that they needed to have unbelievable sort of like patience and stamina. It's meant that they need to be great fundraisers, particularly in this environment, to continue to go and finance a pre-revenue business. And I think that, now that they've built the thing, once you built the thing, the idea was this was always going to roll downhill. And then now they've been able to go and get the validation from the launch partners who they're going to go out with, picking and choosing what I would consider to be sort of like the cream of the crop folks that you would want to like take a product like this to market. And so they're being rewarded for doing it right. And this business often doesn't reward doing it right. It rewards doing it fast and flashy. And this is I hope a case where um, their maturity will be rewarded big time in the long run.
Well, to build upon that, like what I admire about the founders is they exited Alice, which was a hospitality, kind of like back, of the office type of engagement with, helping the hotel run more efficiently. You need towels, we'll go deliver towels to room 203, whatever. It was very successful. And they could have stayed in that lane of doing something in hospitality. They had a world of contacts. I'm sure that they could have just spun up another business that was solving something in
Yep.
hospitality. But no, let's swing for the fence and do something that when I first heard it, I'm like, what? And then when I told my wife and two daughters, they're like, I need that now. I need that in my home. And obviously their model is B2B to C,
Yep.
which is obviously brilliant too. So
Well, when they came and saw me, they said, hey, okay, like we're gonna go do it again. And I'm like getting ready for them to come in. I'm like, okay, great. Justin and Alex are coming. Like, I have a strong inclination to want to work with them. I know them as people, I know them as operators. I passed on Alex. I was wrong on Alice. I was wrong. Like, I want to be around these guys next business. And when they came in, I'm sitting here excited for them to go build something in travel. Like, great. Go back to the well, cut every corner. You know what you're doing. And when they came in, I was sort of taken aback. Like, you're doing what? Like,
what?
like, are you the people to do this? Or are we sure that this makes any sense at all?
Uh,
And like, why don't like this seems really hard. Like, there's a lot of easier stuff. And in spending more time with them and seeing the early team that they had built and brought Chris on, and the conviction that they had around solving this problem was, I sort of like got in the deep end believing that they were doing it for the right reasons and we're going to do it the right way. And so far we've been rewarded.
well, the firm has had a reputation being very consumer focused, yet that is not the case. Like you guys work with lots of different industries. It's not just a consumer fund. There sure have been some successes in that category, but there's a lot broader perspective.
It's funny. Like, New York was an almost entirely consumer startup town when we got started. And so a lot of our sort of formative early year investments that, AKA our most mature investments, and in many cases, some of the bigger companies, because they've been around longer, were consumer businesses. And we did really well in that space. I personally, as an investor, as one of 20 something people at the firm, but as an individual investor, like my heart is as a consumer investor. It doesn't mean that I only do consumer, but like the time that I fall fully out of my chair and fall in love is maybe going to be consumer, where I like, where you get my engine to 100. And it's great that we built a good reputation in consumer. New York has changed and has broadened and births all different kinds of companies. And we're, 60% of our deals are in New York, but we're investing all over the place. And the reality is that, our platform has broadened and the team has broadened. And there's people here who have much less passion for consumer than I do. And they're great investors in the lanes that they're interested in. I recently, you know, talked about sort of the idea that, like, I think our success in consumer is a double-edged sword. It's great that like we're a brand that has some brand recognition and is associated with some big winners, but I also think that, I don't want someone who's not building a consumer company to think that like we're out of our lane or out of our depth looking at one. And so I sort of like made a statement saying, like, don't brand us as a consumer fund. And I've gotten some feedback from folks, including actually one person who I really like respect the hell out of, a former colleague of mine named Jordan Cooper, who's at a firm called Pace Capital now. And Jordan said to me, I saw that like you had some piece in the information or something and you didn't I didn't think you looked good in that story. And I was like, oh, interesting. And he's like, people, Twitter was a buzz with people thinking that like you're turning your back on, consumer or something. And it was like, A, I don't use social media, so I was unaware of any buzz. But B, I'm sort of like, I hear what Jordan's saying, and I'm a little sort of like lost in the middle of like, I just want to find really great founders. If there's amazing people doing cool stuff at consumer, like, hell yeah, let's go. I will always want to do consumer deals, and we will always do consumer deals. Of late, we've done more non-consumer deals. These things are going to be cyclical. We want to find the best founders. I love consumer. I love non-consumer. I just want to find awesome people doing amazing stuff. And by the way, consumer is this big honking thing. Does consumer I think we were associated with consumer goods, Warby Parker, Cotopaxi, BarkBox, Glossier, Allbirds, lots of great stuff. But like, that's one pocket of consumer. There is digital consumer. There are different, there are all different kinds of consumer applications. We were very early in SeatGeek. We were very early in Venmo. We were very early in some hardware stuff, in MakerBot, in Mirror, in Fi, the connected dog collar. That's a really great business. In Hungry Root,
Great. Ben
grocery
was on my
delivery, like
podcast too. Amazing
Ben's
company,
the
amazing
beast,
company.
and
Yeah.
so many different sort of nuances. And so I don't want to be I don't want to lose our juju around being great at consumer, but like, we're a larger firm and we're able to do a bunch of things. And I don't know why, you know, why we need to be, why we need to sort of like bucket things like that. One other thing I would just say is, uh, the reality of sort of how we're operating today. We are still a super, maybe more so than ever before, we are a conviction fund. So what happens is, a company that we're looking at investing doesn't come to sort of management, like our partner meeting, and then we go around the table and everybody votes, and like, I like consumer and other people don't, and so like a thing doesn't get through. This is a highly conviction led group, where at the end of the day, somebody who is a established trusted check writer here is going to take responsibility for an ownership of and pound the table for a deal. And more of my deals are probably going to be consumer than other people's, but I'm one of, 5 or 6 like, established check writers here. And so as a result, like, the numbers may change, because in the past we had a smaller team.
You talked about some different things right there, but so are there things that you're really, really interested in right now? Like, are there some common elements, things that you're thinking about that would be interesting for the portfolio?
I am really explicitly not a thesis driven investor. I am a talent driven investor. And I can understand why a thesis driven investor would argue that that's stupid. And I can argue why a thesis driven investor is less interesting. I don't think there's a right answer to it. It's just like, to each their own. I think knowing what you are is the foundation of being good. You got to know what you're good at and what you want to focus on. And like, I know I'm going to be talent hunting, and that's where my heart is, and that's what I love, and that's what I think I'm like, where I have real edge. And are there areas and business models that broadly, when we start talking about them, we get more excited? Of course. I think we're in an era of automation, broadly powered by, the elephant in the room. And I think that we're excited at looking at real problems that can be solved in entirely new ways, due to, the sort of current changes that are possible with big data, and how it's going to be activated in a whole bunch of different industries. That's going to be a backdrop to a lot of the stuff that we look at. That being said, there are some other broad trends that I think we're seeing. We saw an unbundling of software, lots and lots and lots of small point solutions, lots of venture money flood into a zillion startups, and in every nook and cranny of, any area of optimization in any sort of business, there was someone who was doing like, we're like, doing office bathroom cleaning
Right.
optimizations for after hours. Like, I mean,
Right.
like,
Yeah.
you're getting,
So fine
and we,
tuned.
back to this idea of pendulum, you see the pendulum shift back and forth. I think we're seeing pendulums shift back to less point solution, more fully integrated solution. I mean, you've seen this in like media is a perfect, you know, uh, analog to this, the unbundling and rebundling of media. You're seeing this in software now. And so that's interesting, and a place that we're playing. A trend that I think we're generally seeing a bunch of stuff in, and we've made a few investments in, is different versions of business in a box. How do you use AI to power service businesses and sort of human in the loop, uh, and look at industries where there's huge entrepreneurial energy, and can you help make these businesses more efficient? So we've got a few bets in different areas there. But again, we're not going and saying business in a box. Let's go find every business in a box business in the world. We do sort of track talent first as our sort of high level mantra. Um,
So how do you evaluate talent though, because you are making that first check and the business
yeah,
model might not be figured out yet. So how do you
yeah.
evaluate the talent?
So it's a combination of sort of art and science, but I think you have to acknowledge that it's a lot of art in the early days and a lot of pattern recognition. And we have some of the questions that we ask, that when you ask 1,000 people and you start to get down to, you do this enough, you start to understand people's uh, reasons for doing things. The why matters a lot. Uh, you start to um, I think we'll start to see trends where you see talent start to sort of matriculate into different markets or different areas, and you go, hold on, something's happening here. Like, we're seeing heat around this kind of model, this kind of industry, and then you make sure you see everybody around that space. And if it's a space that we start to really like, you say, is there a team here that has unfair advantage, that has right to win, that's solving a problem that they sort of understand more intuitively, we think, than other people, that they have unfair advantage in terms of go to market. And a lot of that comes down to a bias that we have to what we would call fully formed humans, which is people who, they don't have to necessarily have like worked in that specific business, but they have to have some unfair advantage and right to win in the space that they're in. Like, what is their truly unique insight? How differentiated is it? How successful has this person been in the other things that they've done in their life? Little bit less like, oh, they worked at Stripe. That's awesome. Here's $5 million because you were working at a big hot company. I think a lot of venture money is sort of heat seeking off of pedigree in terms of the the logo. And I think that there are times where that is relevant based on the area of that business that you worked, and maybe some of the access to talent that you might have, et cetera, et cetera. But broadly speaking, I'd like to find somebody who is solving a problem that they intuitively understand, that they've had in some way, they've had sort of like to had the crap kicked out of them a little bit, uh, to learn those lessons. And um, we look, we've done this for a long time. We know how to run a process. We know how to feel out. We have a ton of pattern recognition on folks who have been successful in the past, and uh, we're really good at a certain kind of diligence exercise that we do around understanding the kind of talent that we're working with. Uh, like, I wish that I had an answer that this is some numbers game. for how we're able to pick, and like we have an algorithm that's going to like inform the companies that we back. We are way more artistic than that at the stage that we invest. And like you either believe that we're good at it and you can look back at a track record of finding, you know, lots and lots of companies that are, multi-billion dollar companies that we found at seed, and sort of believing that like the that there's empirical evidence that backs up that like we actually are good at this. Or you can say, I don't like that kind of investing, and then that's great, and you should probably not go be a seed investor, and you should probably invest in later stage firms, and that's fine, and I'm all for that too. It's just not us.
All right. So what are 3 apps you can't live without?
I'm gonna have to pull up my phone for that just to see where my heart takes me. The New York Times Games app, for sure. I'm
Okay.
a crossword junkie.
Interesting. Okay.
Love the New York Times crossword.
I heard
That
that
is one
app
of
is
my
saving the
like.
company. Like that's, publishing, like they're crushing it with
I
that new
mean,
app.
they're crushing it with that new app. And actually, we have an unannounced deal uh, in a company that I think will, uh, in some interesting ways, try to give them a run for their money. That I'm excited about. Consumer, come on. I love that. I mean, this is so embarrassing. I love FanDuel. I love like I have so much. I'm a massive sports fan. I gamble very small amounts of money on sports, but I love adding that extra little element of uh, caring to watching passive games that I have nothing riding on. I don't think I'm probably a very good, valuable customer for FanDuel, but I love that. I love using it. I think it's a really like excellent platform. Um, and what else? You know what? I'm a bit of a I'm just like interested. Oh, this is not an app, but I love Eight Sleep. It's a product, but the Eight Sleep app is a part of that experience.
Mm-hmm.
It's a mattress cover that tracks, it heats and cools uh, sort of dynamically based on your body temperature, and helps to keep you sleeping deeper and longer. And I'm just like a real fanboy and love the product and miss it when I'm sleeping in a hotel and don't have it. I have no financial connection to the company, not an investor in it. Same with FanDuel, and same with the New York Times app, needless to say. But
So
I
you notice a
love the
huge
product.
difference with that product. Like
You know what? I don't. I mean, I think so. Um, I wake up in the middle of the night. Like I would wake up in the middle of the night, hot or cold sometimes, and I don't anymore. And I know a lot of smart people had to recommend it to me before I finally took the sort of plunge on it. And there's no going back. I absolutely love the product.
how about outside of work? What do you do for fun?
I have 3 kids. I have a 3-year-old girl and a 7 and 9 boy. And so I'm in it, right?
Mm-hmm.
I'm family time, and I love to travel. I think like a lot of people, have done a pretty good job of prioritizing it much more since COVID, and sort of appreciating that, I'm in a fortunate situation where I can, I mean, I'm a believer of being in the office, but like I have a little bit of flexibility, and I should take advantage of that and go see and do interesting things. And so I love traveling. Um, and I love eating. I started Thrillist. I love sort of, food and drink, and sort of that lifestyle. I'm definitely like a night person, not a morning person. And like everybody else, I want to stay really physically active. I run a bunch. I'm in the gym a bunch. I play golf, and uh, I try to, but I don't have some like super cool. I'm not good at anything. I'm like okay at a bunch of stuff, but you know, I don't have any like any one thing that I'm world class at. Uh, much to my chagrin.
So you're not a professional kite surfer.
Unfortunately, I'm not a professional kite surfer. I would like to. But I will say that like I'm at an age, and I think just like a place in my life where like the answer is yes. The answer is yes, not 100% of the time, but most of the time. And this is a silly little anecdote that I'll maybe end with, which is a few weeks ago I was with my father and my two sons. We went down to spring training in Florida to watch the Mets. And while we were in the game, it started torrential downpouring, like the worst rain you've ever seen in your life. And our car is parked who knows where in some grass field. I like you can barely see 3 feet in front of you. And the weather report says that it's going to stop raining in 15 minutes. And my oldest son, who's a beast, is like, Dad, let's go get the car. Like, let's go, let's you and me go find the car. And it's like, it is so easy to say, are you crazy? Like, the rain's gonna be done in 10 minutes. Can we just stay here, please, and not like do what this is? And I was like, you know what? Like, okay, fine. And we went out and got, like
Drenched.
mud up to our knees and like, total destruction. And then like we have to go straight to the airport from there or whatever. But like it's the memory of the trip, right?
Yep.
And I think like the little lesson in that is just like it's so easy to just set rules for yourself and just like say no to stuff and whatever. And it takes a lot more energy and sometimes courage to just like do it. And I feel like that is that's the ticket for me, is like just do it.
Yep. Yeah, no, absolutely. It became not just a memory, but it's the story that's going to last forever.
100%. And it was like, it, it, it's really easy to do, but it's even easier not to do.
Yep. Well, Ben, thanks so much for taking the time to walk us through background story of companies you've built, obviously all the great work that you and your colleagues at Lerer Hippeau are up to as investors, and obviously all the great advice.
Thank you so much for having me. Really appreciate it.